Okay. All right, this is an interview at the New York State Military Museum, Saratoga Springs, New York. It is the 10th of April, 2008, approximately 10 a.m. Interviewer is Mike Russert. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
It's Leonard Charles Eddy. And I was born in July 11, 1920. And I was born here in Saratoga Springs.
Okay. What was your educational background before you went into the service?
Well, I graduated from Saratoga High School in 1937, and then I went to Bentley College, and I graduated from Bentley College in 1942. I signed up before graduation for the Naval Air Corps, and there was a period of time before I was called for instruction, which began 15th of January 1943.
Okay, I'm going to go back a second. Before that, where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Actually, I had briefly attended Worcester Polytechnic Institute, and I was there at the time that the Japanese attacked us.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember how you heard about it and your reaction?
Well, I suppose like most people, it was very unsettling to get the news. And I was probably on the campus somewhere at that time.
Mm-hmm. Did you know where Pearl Harbor was?
Yes.
Okay, most people weren't even aware of where it was at the time. Okay. Now, why did you decide to volunteer for the Naval Air Program?
Well, I thought that's probably the program they offered seemed to appeal to most of us young students at the time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, where did you go for the program?
Well, in January of '43, I joined a group of cadets in New York City, and we were assigned for training at New Paltz, New York.
No, this was
we had both classroom and flight training there.
No, this was the V6 program?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Where else did you go? Anywhere else besides New Paltz? Or
yes,
was that
New Paltz was only a brief stay.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. There was no flying at Chapel Hill, but there was a lot of training there.
But you did fly at New Paltz when you were at New Paltz?
At New Paltz.
What kind of planes did you fly?
It was just a small Aranca tandem. It was a two-seater,
Mm-hmm.
one in front of the other. And then, when that was completed, as I say, we went to Chapel Hill. Then after Chapel Hill, we went to Glenview, Illinois.
Okay.
And that was the next step in flight training. They flew what they called the yellow Perils. They were a biplane, open cockpit biplane. And I had several hours of experience there, but I had some difficulty with the maneuvers, and it was just a case, I presume at the time, of some instability with different flight patterns with that was you had to learn from the aeronautic booklet. So I rather than take a chance on maybe feeling the instability at some point in time, I transferred to the Amphibious Force with the training station at Solomons, Maryland. And we trained in the Chesapeake Bay. It was the different landing crafts were available for training there, and when that training was completed, we went to Orange, Texas, to pick up our ship, which was a LCI 948, which was one of the landing crafts which carried troops into the beaches.
Now, how long were you in the V6 program, approximately?
Well, if you count from the time I signed up to the time that I transferred to the Amphibious Force, it was probably, let's see, June. Probably around 8 months.
And how long were you at the Amphibious Force School?
I was there on, let's see, I went there in the early fall, and then in Solomons we picked up the ship. It was probably early in 44. No.
Were you there several months
yeah.
then?
I was there several months, and then we went to Texas, and where that type of ship was being constructed. This was a ship that had ramps front, accommodations for several troops, and you would go into a beach and drop the ramps, and then the troops would go off the ramps. After we got our ship, after a shakedown cruise near Houston, Texas, we went to the Norfolk, Virginia, and then we sailed for the Mediterranean.
Now, how big of a crew was on a LCI?
Well, it varied a little bit, but generally speaking, somewhere in the neighbor of 15, 16.
Now, what were your duty assignments?
I was the, I went in as a boatswain, and I don't rightly recall, but I got to a point where I was elevated to boatswain first class, and had more or less in charge of the deck crew as far as the maintenance and painting and whatever had to be done on the ship. And there were 3 officers, and as I say, about anywhere 15, 16 crew that were not officers.
Now, this ship sailed across the Atlantic then?
Yeah, we went over to North Africa. That was the first stop.
How does a ship, they're both that small, handle in the Atlantic?
They don't draw much water. They're 150 feet long, roughly, and would draw maybe at most 10 feet of water. So that they were not very stable. It took us 2 weeks to go over to North Africa. And then after we were more or less shuttled around the Mediterranean, we went to Sicily, Italy, and in August, we went over there in June of 44, and then in August of 44 we made the invasion of southern France on the more or less the Riviera coast at a town called Saint Maxime. And after that invasion,
Now, were you under fire when you went in?
We were firing, but there wasn't much of any return fire that I recall, because there was no after a period of time, we were able to, after the troops had gone ashore and started following up after the enemy, we were able to travel around the Mediterranean and expedite the unloading of supplies and so forth.
Now, how many troops were at, and did you land? How many could it carry?
They could, the LCIs could carry, each LCI could carry around 100 troops.
Okay. So you spent time then cruising around the Mediterranean,
Right.
delivering supplies?
And also some troop transport from North Africa to the north coast, France and Italy. But we were there until December of 44. When we were actually leaving at the time, the Allied troops were faced against really a last big shot by the Germans. forgot what they called it.
Oh, the Battle of the Bulge?
The Battle of the Bulge, yeah. And then we went back to Florida. Took 3 weeks to go back because we were heading into the wind most of the time, and it was very rough. We were in Florida with a change of half of the crew, and the other half was reassigned. So we had a month's time off at that point. And then we were assigned to Pacific. So we went through the Panama Canal, which was quite an experience.
In what way?
Well, I mean, the fact that this canal of this size in different sections had been built under very bad conditions. And we also passed one large battleship coming back to the Atlantic.
There must have been quite a contrast between your LCI and a battleship.
Yes, there was, particularly size-wise.
Yes.
When we got to San Diego, it was in March of '45, and we were there to have heavier firepower put onto our LCI, expecting an invasion of Japan at some point.
Now, what did you do between December and March that you were out in the Pacific? What were your duties?
Well, we were just more or less at the naval base at San Diego.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because this change of the firepower is going to take quite a while. But we were just about ready to take off when the Japanese surrendered, which was in August of '45.
Now, what changes did they do to the firepower? What did you have initially, and what did they change to?
We had all 20 millimeters initially, and they were installing some higher caliber guns. I've forgotten exactly what, but anyway, that was the main reason that we were there. After that, we still had work to do with some troop transport from the U.S. to actually some Marines that we transferred out to the Guam with a stop at Hawaii on the way out. And then we went to the Philippines, and we did some carrying of troops that had been there back to the base at Samar, where they would go home, be shipped home. And then it was my turn to go home for discharge, and the captain of our ship, he made me chief boatswain mate, temporary, and that was the rank that I held when I was discharged. I went back on another amphib ship from the Philippines to the U.S. and it was a larger landing craft called LSD.
Now, I'm going to go back a little bit. What was daily life like on that landing craft,
Well,
LCI?
there was always something to do in the way of general maintenance of the ship. And we were underway a lot, so we had different watches that we had to stand. The watches usually were 4-hour watches. And the crew got along, together very well.
Must have been pretty cramped quarters, though. What were your quarters like?
Well, the sleeping quarters were cramped. You had 4, sometimes 3. Most of the time, there were bunks on top of one another, the same as you would find in a submarine, I imagine. But you were able to be out on deck when we were underway. We had, of course, all of our, except when we were at a specific base, we were always served meals in a couple of sections.
So you would have had to have a galley. You had a galley.
We had a galley, and
did you have to eat in shifts because of the size?
well, actually, because of different watches,
Okay.
there was some, some.
Now, what kind of food did you have while you were at sea?
Well, when we were over in the Mediterranean, we were able to trade because we had some days off over there. We would trade some cigarettes for fresh vegetables and sometimes fresh bread. But otherwise, we had like canned eggs, dried, and a lot of packaged and canned food. But it wasn't all that bad.
Okay. Now, you wrote down, you had a little story about in Italy, the young boy sang to you.
Oh, yes. He would come around the dock where we were tied up and sing. Usually he'd sing "O Solo Mio." He was there to get some food, So he was a nice little kid, and we also were able, when we were in Italy, to take a day trip up to Rome. So we were excited, to get up there and at least for the one day to look around. Out in the Philippines, some of the soldiers that had been there for months, when we got them on board, they were kind of they had been camping out on the island of Mindanao and just waiting for the word to, have transportation back to the States. But they were a little unwieldy sometimes. Their officers had to lay down the law if they were getting into arguments or things like that. But that was the farthest point we went, was the Philippines. And
Did you ever have to carry any Japanese POWs?
no. The only time we encountered POWs was in after the invasion at southern France there at St. Maxime. They had a bunch of Germans that were put in a compound right after the invasion there. And since we had time going around the Mediterranean, we were able to talk to some of them and exchange maybe cigarettes for belt buckles and things of that nature.
Now, you said that you performed an unusual duty. You said you carried the guideline for troops from the ship ramp to the beach. Could you describe that, elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, at the end of the ramp, the line was attached, and then I carried in a small anchor type to the beach so that the troops could use that line for stability in going through the water, which was probably a couple feet deep, just so they'd have the stability. Yeah. But that was part of the deal. I mentioned that to my wife when she wrote that down. Yeah.
Did you ever see any USO shows at all?
No, we didn't. I was trying to think about we were able to do quite a bit of sightseeing at Hawaii.
Did you go see Pearl Harbor?
And I met somebody there who was a Saratoga lad who was with a USO show, but we didn't actually see the show.
Did you go to see Pearl Harbor while you were there?
I didn't. I didn't get to see Pearl Harbor. No. I'd want to go there sometime, but we still haven't made it yet.
Okay. Now, when were you discharged?
It was January 28, 1946. I can leave a couple of things. This is a front, well, I'll show you the original.
Oh, your discharge papers?
That's the original, and then on the back it tells the different places. It doesn't mention all that I mentioned to you, but the places where we were actually logged in for a while. And that's on the back there, but it's also on this second sheet here.
Okay. I'll put that in your folder.
See, that's
okay. Now, after you were discharged, did you ever make use of the GI Bill?
I did, yeah. For real estate, I got an authorization.
Oh, okay.
I was trying to remember.
Now, did you ever make use of the 5220 Club?
No. No, I didn't.
Well, most guys maxed it out. Did you go right to work, or?
I did. My father was in the insurance business in Saratoga Springs, and after a couple of weeks I went to work there and was there for 43 years. The agency has since been sold to another agency.
Mm-hmm.
But this was, on the back of this shows the amount.
Oh, okay. $6,300. Now, did you join any veterans organizations at all?
I was with the I was trying to remember. So long ago. I didn't join the VFW. I know I used to go to the American Legion home.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was I was not military, but I was with the Elks Club for a while, and I decided I was involved with too much night activity, so and the family was growing up, and I remember retiring from the Elks, and I think maybe at the same time I discontinued going to the American Legion.
Mm-hmm.
But we had 4 children, and there seemed to be so much to do between the business and the family that I didn't involve myself with too much extracurricular activity after that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you ever stay in contact with anyone that was in service with you?
Yeah, I did. A fellow from the well, 2 fellows from the LCI, and we still exchange Christmas cards. I was trying to think now. Had a sad experience several years ago when my youngest child, John, he died of cancer when he was 23 years old. And I kind of became closer, actually. Well, I was always close to the children, but I became even closer after we lost him.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of too much else after that, as far as the military was concerned.
Well, how do you think your time in the service had an effect on your life?
I didn't think much of it at the time. I mean, I didn't have any ill feeling as to where those 3.5 years went, you know, as long as it accomplished what the United States was set out to accomplish.
Do you think you would have traveled as much? I mean, because you got to see the Atlantic, the Mediterranean, the Pacific, which mostly it's just one theater.
Yeah. Let's see. I got the American Theater Ribbon, European Theater Ribbon with 1 star for that invasion, the Victory Medal, and then since the Victory came prior to my Pacific duty, that is going out to, I did get, as long as I was on the West Coast there, Asiatic Pacific Theater Ribbon, and then Good Conduct Medal.
Now, if you hold these up to the camera, Eric can focus on these, and just tell us a little bit about these photographs. If you just hold it in front of you like this, he can focus in on that. Now, that was when you were a cadet?
Yes, yes.
If you just hold it up in front of you like this,
right,
he can focus on that. So, about when was that taken? I think it said it on the back.
Yeah, this was 1943.
Okay.
Wait a minute, I can't seem to get it in.
All right. Well, that's okay.
Ah, there
We've
it
got
goes,
some-
finally.
All right.
Yes, this
Okay, and this one?
is separate or what?
Yeah, so you can do that one separate. He focused on the other one already.
Oh, okay.
Now that's when you were in the LCI?
Yeah. This was in Italy.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Well, thank you.
Now, can we keep those photos?
Yes.
Okay.